The many guests whom the far-famed hospitality of Admetus brought him were lodged in a set of chambers built around a small inner court of the palace. A postern on one side of the court led to the kitchen quarters, on the other, massive folding doors divided these apartments from the central hall. These doors were now shut and barred. "Never in all my days," exclaimed an indignant voice, "have I seen such a ruffian." It was the old slave Xanthias who spoke. He came from one of the guest rooms with a tray full of empty dishes, which he put down in the court, and then sat down beside it, looking very hot and weary. "Never saw the like of him," he went on, in grumbling soliloquy, "though we have guests of all sorts and from all parts here, and 'tis I that wait on them all. The worst of the lot, that's what he is. Wasn't it unmannerly enough to come in at all, when he saw our master was in mourning? But what does he do next? Calls for his dinner and, instead of taking civilly what we could put on table, begins bawling for this, that, and the other, though he knew there was a death in the house. And on top of that, he gets drunk. When he's eaten enough for 6, my lord must have his revel, puts on a myrtle wreath, swills down our best wine in pailfuls, and starts singing, or rather howling, like a beast. Hark at him now! And I had to wait on this rascal, thief or pirate is what I take him for, while she went out of the house, never to come back any more. I couldn't see her go, my dear mistress, that was so good to us all, and always begged us off when the master was in one of his tempers. Couldn't follow her, with the others, and give her the last salute. Oh, it's hard to bear, that, very hard. And all because of this abominable fellow." As he spoke thus, tears gathered in the old man's eyes. He wiped them hastily away with the sleeve of his coarse tunic and stood up. "This will never do," he muttered. "I must go back to him. The master gave me strict orders not to let him see there was anything wrong." But at this moment Heracles appeared at his chamber door and stepped into the court. His face was deeply flushed, and he reeled a little as he walked. He was singing, horribly out of tune, a snatch of some drinking song. A wreath of fresh myrtle sat rakishly askew on his bullet head. Seeing Xanthias, he left off singing, and addressed him with drunken solemnity, yet distinctly enough. "What do you mean, sirrah, by pulling these long faces? Don't you know it's a servant's duty to look pleasant when he waits on visitors? Instead of which, you have been looking as black as thunder at me all this time at your master's best friend, mind you." Xanthias, taken aback, muttered something about the trouble in the house. I, said Heracles, nodding sagely, "I know what you mean. But she wasn't one of the family, you must remember that. That would have been a different thing altogether. As it is, you have no business to be so gloomy and woebegone, so come here and listen to me, while I try and teach you better." He sat down on a marble bench near him and went on more solemnly than ever. "Do you understand the nature of human existence, my friend? You don't, of course, how should you? But no matter, I'll explain it to you. It's like this. We must all die, but we none of us know when. Nobody can tell for certain whether he will be alive tomorrow, and all the wise men in the world put together can't tell him either. Now, having taught you this great fact, which I hope you can grasp—" "I knew it before," put in Xanthias, curtly. "Why, all the better," said Heracles, with sudden joviality, "but you don't see the moral of it, which is that a man should eat and drink and kiss the girls while he may. There's wisdom for you, my ancient. And now come along with me, and we'll drown your grief in the wine cup. Come and drink, I say, that will soon stop your fretting over a woman who was nothing to you." "Nothing to me," burst out Xanthias, uncontrollably. "My noble mistress nothing to me." He stopped, terrified at his own words, yet looked half defiantly at Heracles. "I have done it now," he thought, "but it was his fault, he goaded me past bearing. He says nothing, pray heaven he's too drunk to understand." Heracles neither spoke nor moved for several minutes. Xanthias noticed that his face had suddenly paled and hardened and that a curious gleam had come into his eyes. He frowned, not angrily, but like a man thinking deeply. At last, rising to his feet, "So your master lied to me," he said, quietly. "Why was that?" Voice and manner were so transformed that Xanthias could hardly answer for sheer bewilderment. Was this the underbred, tipsy swashbuckler, who had invited a slave to hobnob with him a moment ago? This man who looked and spoke like the peer of kings? And with such an eye? "My lord," he faltered out, "it was because my master could not bear you should go away. He He is so hospitable. And he feared you would not consent to stay if you knew his wife was dead. When did she die? It was this morning, about 3 hours before you came. Heracles drew a deep breath and began striding to and fro. Good gods, he said, in a low voice, what sort of man is this Admetus? To make me his guest by a heartless fraud, does he call it hospitality? I call it an outrage. For look what it has made me guilty of, not knowing. Alcestis, to think I have been feasting and reveling, and she lying dead within a few yards of me. With that, he snatched off the myrtle wreath and threw it from him angrily. For some moments he stood fixed in thought, then, turning to Xanthias, I am going to your lady, he said, calmly. Which is the way to the tomb? Straight along the Larissa road, replied the wondering slave. You will see it as soon as you are outside the town. But, pardon me, you will be too late. It is near sunset, and the mourners must be already returning. Heracles smiled at him kindly as he answered, I shall not be too late, good soul, for what I have to do. Now listen, you must take me quietly out of the house by some back way. Tell Admetus when he returns that I could not stay, and have gone northward on my errand. And, forgive me for wounding that faithful heart of yours, not knowing what I did, it may be I shall make you amends soon. He held out his hand as to an equal. The old slave clasped it timidly, with a look that showed the amends were made already. He is a king, thought Xanthias. Only a king could have done that.
Admetus had played his part in the ceremonies at the tomb with a mournful dignity which greatly impressed the beholders. The elders, especially, watched him admiringly as he led the prayers and invocations, and offered the customary sacrifice to the nether powers. No noisy outbursts of grief, no tremor of voice or hand, marred his exact performance of the appointed ritual. That was how a chief mourner should behave. When all had been done, and the last farewell spoken to the dead, the funeral train went homeward in solemn silence. Filled with respectful sympathy, the elders escorted their king to his own gate, but there a painful shock awaited them. For as he reached it, Admetus suddenly started back, trembling from head to foot, and in tones of agony, I cannot go in, he cried, I dare not. Oh, fool, what is this that I have done? And broke into long and bitter weeping. For some time he could not be persuaded to enter the house. He met the elders' attempts to soothe him by pouring out a flood of wild self-accusation and remorse. It was true what his father had said, he had killed Alcestis. She was at peace now, nothing could touch her further, but he must live on, in misery, his home made hell to him by torturing memories, yet where else could he go? Wherever he went he would see looks of scorn, hear men whisper, there goes the coward. And at last, friends, he said, she that lies yonder, where I ought to be lying, has chosen the better part and is far, far happier than I. Though death be a fearful thing, shamed life is a worse. I see that now, too late.
Heracles! Can this be you? They told me you were gone, hours ago. Though it was near midnight, Admetus sat beside the hearth in his great hall. Old servants had pleaded with him to go to rest, but he had roughly bidden them leave him alone, for there was no rest for him that night, least of all in what was her room. So he remained in his own chair by the hearth, staring wretchedly into the fire, until from very weariness he dropped asleep. Awaking with a start, he saw Heracles standing before him. A little way off, in the shadow of a pillar, stood another figure, which he did not notice for the moment. Admetus, began Heracles, abruptly, if a man has a grievance against his friend, he should speak out, not hold his tongue and let it rankle. So first I must tell you this, being your friend, I had a claim to sharing your sorrow, and to keep the truth from me as you did was treating me most unkindly and unfairly. Surely you must see that. Oh, Heracles, indeed I meant no unkindness, pleaded Admetus, I would not offend you for the world. But I was so miserable, and it would have been the last straw to make you unhappy too, and see you go away from me. Well, well, said Heracles, we will say no more of that. I did not come back to reproach you in your grief, my friend. No, I have come because we are friends still, and I want you to do me a service. You have only to name it, said the king, fervently. Well, it is this, said Heracles. I want you to take charge for me of this woman here until I come back from Thrace. If by any mishap I should not come back, you may keep her as a handmaid. So saying, he turned to the figure waiting in the shadows and led it forward. It was the figure of a woman, cloaked and veiled as if for traveling, so that more could not be seen of her than that she was tall and graceful. The king stared amazedly at her as she stood before him, passive and mute, leaning on Heracles' arm. I don't understand, he said, uneasily. Who is this woman? Where have you brought her from? Do you think I have stolen her? Said Heracles, smiling. No, man, she's my lawful prize, from a wrestling bout. A hard tussle I had to get her, too, I promise you. This was how it was. Before I had got far on my road, I came on a great gathering of country folk holding athletic sports. There were prizes of horses for the running and jumping, cattle for the boxing and wrestling, with a woman slave as extra prize for the best wrestler. So it seemed a shame not to make a little honest profit when it came in my way, you see. But, as I said, you must look after the woman for the present. Heracles, said the king, much agitated, I beg of you, do not ask me this. You have many friends in Faerie, let her go to one of them, who has not been through what I have. I tell you, I cannot have her here, I suffer enough already, without being perpetually reminded of my loss. But why should this woman remind you of it? Asked Heracles, gently. The king's gaze was still riveted on the veiled form. So like, he said in a broken voice, my wife's very image in shape, and height, and carriage. Heracles, for pity's sake, take her out of my sight. It kills me to look at her. Unhappy wretch that I am, he added with a burst of tears, I never tasted the whole bitterness of grief till now. Oh, my Alcestis, my lost wife. And he covered his face with his hands, sobbing aloud. Heracles felt the arm that rested on his tremble, and move as though to withdraw itself. A low, shuddering sigh came from beneath the veil. Not yet, he whispered, quickly, he is too unprepared. Then, in an earnest tone, if only were Alcestis I had brought you, my poor friend. If only your strong Heracles were strong enough to bring her back out of the underworld to the light of day. What would you say to me, if I could do that for you? Admetus looked up, drearily. I know how gladly you would do it, he said, but where's the use of talking like that? Nothing can bring the dead to life again. She will never come back, never, and I shall go mourning for her all my days. She deserves that you should, said Heracles, and yet, Admetus, it is not right, nor manly, to give way utterly to sorrow. Try to bear up, and remember, time heals all wounds, even when they are as deep as yours. Nay, forgive me, it is easy to preach, I know. And now I must say farewell, but before I go, will you not, for my sake, receive this stranger? Come, take her by the hand. But Admetus shrank back in dismay. No, he cried, by Zeus your father, I implore you, do not ask me that again. I cannot do it. I have told you why I cannot. And I beg you to take her away. Listen to me, Admetus, said Heracles, quietly. I ask you the small service of housing this woman, and you refuse because of a certain fancied likeness without so much as seeing her face, remember. Very well, be it so, I will take her away. But do you know what you are going to do, first? You are going to let me put her hand in yours, and then, lift her veil and look at her well. After that, she shall go at once, if you wish. Now, no questions, it is enough for you to know that I have a good reason for choosing you shall do this thing. Their eyes met for an instant, and Admetus suddenly felt himself powerless in the presence of a stronger will. I yield, he said, reluctantly stretching out his hand, though it is like making me touch the head of Medusa, such nameless dread is upon me. Courage, friend, said Heracles, you shall thank me for this yet. Take her hand. Have you got it? Bravely done. And now, draw that veil aside, and see if she is really so like your queen. Mechanically, as in a dream, the king obeyed. I have done this before, flashed through his mind, but without consciousness that he was repeating the symbolic act that closed the rites of marriage, the bridegroom's unveiling of the bride as she was given into his hands. The next instant his cry rang through the hall, oh, gods in heaven, who is this? He dropped the hand he held, cold and light it had lain in his, and stood quivering, looking at that mute, unveiled face with a terrible hunger in his eyes. Is it you, Alcestis? He babbled. Have you come back to me, out of the grave? She does not answer. Heracles, why doesn't she speak to me? For it is my wife, isn't it? Oh, no, no, how could that be? Only some trick of the mocking gods, only a phantom in her likeness. But Heracles answered cheerfully, in his deep, cordial voice, Do you take me for a necromancer, then, Admetus? Nay, I deal neither in phantoms nor ghosts. She I have brought you as a living woman, and your wife. Touch her again, take her in your arms, and you will know. But because she has passed through the grave, the underworld gods have power over her until the third day of her return to life. Until then she may not break silence. Now, King, I leave you to such happiness as I pray the gods may not grudge to one of us mortals. Oh, Heracles, burst out Admetus, I know you now for what men call you the son of Almighty Zeus. How else could you have wrought this miracle that my brain reels to think upon? There was no miracle, said Heracles, simply. What happened was this. I knew, as all men know, that King Death ever comes at nightfall to taste his blood offering at the tombs of the newly buried. So I lay in ambush till he came, a weird, black-hooded shape, then rushed out and grappled with him. And though he wrestled with all his hell-born strength, I so mauled him that he was glad to get out of my grip on condition of surrendering his prey, who now stands here. But lead her to her room, Admetus, she is faint and weary. And now, farewell, for I must be taking the road again. Ah, no, cried Admetus, do not leave us, you need not, now. Stay and be our guest, in this house you have saved. Another time I will, said Heracles, but not now, for my business presses. Farewell, live happy, and in future, my friend, practice truer courtesy to guests. With that he strode to the door, but paused there a moment, and looked back smiling at those two, already clinging together. Admetus had forgotten all else in the ecstasy of that reunion. But Alcestis, with her soul in her eyes, met the parting look of her preserver. And it seemed to her that she saw verily the god within him light his face.